You know what I was thinking today? It's like, why does like every white dude with an opinion think that they deserve a podcast? Anyways, welcome to VCR, a Vintage Cinema Rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Michael.
And I'm White Blake.
Hi, White Blake. All right. I'm just gonna brush right on past that.
You unpacked it, and now I've put it out there.
You sure have, Blake. Okay. Oh, this is gonna be a good one. I can tell.
Jesus.
Thanks. So, Blake, what are we doing this week?
We have our first of the next 4 episodes being our Oscars series.
That's right. It's that time of year.
And it has been 2 years now since we covered one of the greatest movies ever made, The Godfather Part 1.
The Godfather Part 1.
And so we thought, hey, it's been 2 years. 2 years since the 50-year anniversary of The Godfather Part 1 winning the Best Picture Award. So let's do another Godfather movie. And we're going to do Godfather Part 2.
Godfather Part Dos, which I have never seen.
But before we blow your mind with The Godfather Part 2 that you've never seen,
That I've never seen.
we're going to actually do the first movie or one of the other movies that was nominated for Best Picture in 1975. And you know what that was?
The Conversation.
The Conversation, which just so happens to be one of 2 movies nominated for Best Picture that was directed by Francis Ford Coppola in the same year.
That must have been a generational run that year.
Yeah.
I mean, good for him.
It's kind of wild, honestly. Like, can you imagine devoting that much time and effort to one movie, let alone 2, and both of them being nominated?
They're both coming out at the same time. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you're just on, right?
Yeah. I guess you got to make hay while it's day.
I feel like, and I've thought about this for a long time, I feel like a lot of artists have like a 10-year run where they do all their best work and they're just on, like, totally on the ball.
Yeah.
And like, I'm sure there's exceptions to that, but like, it feels like in general, artists every artist has like a certain period, a fertile period. And when you're in that fertile period, you need to be fertilizing. Yeah. So anyway, we're going to be talking about Francis Ford Coppola's fertilization this week.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't believe you started with that. So this is a really interesting movie, and I think I'll give it to you to do our quick plot summary of spoiler free as possible. But this is a movie that I don't even know that a lot of our listeners have heard of before, let alone seen.
So I will just say that, as per usual, so we just did Sleepless in Seattle, which is a movie. Okay, let me take a step back. Normally what happens is, and I've said this before, I'm just out in the world laying down in puddles of my own saliva, and then you text me with a list of options being like, here, pick the next movie, and I just go, that one. Mm-hmm. And normally they're movies that like I've at least heard of, right? Mm-hmm. You know, sometimes it's something like Repo Man, for instance. I didn't know anything about that one, but usually like with Sleepless in Seattle, like I kind of know what I'm walking into, right? This movie, though, I think a few weeks ago, you were just like, I want to do The Conversation. And I was like, all right.
Yeah.
So, I went to watch this movie at home and I was like, so I guess it's about 2 people talking. And
Kind of.
Yeah. Like I didn't know Gene Hackman was in it. I didn't know really anything going into this movie.
Yeah. And I mean, if you look at the movie poster as well, I would say it actually just doesn't look like Gene Hackman in the poster. And that's somewhat by design, actually.
I guess so, right? And like the poster itself is almost like maddeningly unhelpful.
Yeah.
You're just like, what?
Not the greatest movie poster ever made.
No, I guess not. So anyway, should I jump right into it?
Yeah, I guess so. I think this is the one that you do want to kind of go in blindish on. And I would recommend it. So I don't know how you're going to dance around this.
You know
one.
what? This is ironic and this is kind of jumping ahead, but I almost kind of feel like I've said multiple times that like my favorite way to like experience movies is like almost knowing nothing about them.
Yeah.
Like it's interesting. So like my book will hopefully be coming out in the next couple years. And I've been thinking like, I wish, you know how like on books they have like the back cover where they give you a little synopsis. I'm like, I almost wish books didn't have synopsises. Like if you just opened to them and bought them without really knowing anything, right?
Yeah, right.
But despite all that and despite that opinion, and despite how many copies of my book I guess I'm going to desecrate when it comes out, I'm just going to rip the back jacket copy off. Like, I almost feel like this is kind of one of those movies for a modern viewer where like it would behoove you to know a little something going into it.
Yeah, maybe we'll talk about that in the who this movie is for section.
Yeah.
Because maybe you and I have to debate that one back and
We
forth
might
a bit.
have mixed feelings on this one.
Yeah.
Okay, so Gene Hackman stars as Henry Call. That's Caul, not Call. Do you get it? So basically, he is a private, like, what would you call it? Like a private surveillance expert, right?
Yep.
So he's contacted by like high-profile clients who want recordings of something, usually conversations, right? So like,
Secret conversations.
yeah, like not not podcasts,
Yeah.
right? Because you can just listen to those. But like, yeah, so he is kind of widely respected in his field as like the greatest surveillance expert of all time, right?
Yep.
Like there's all these crazy stories about how he like bugged telephone wires or like infiltrated this or like was able to like sneak in through here, right?
Yeah.
So Henry is just a consummate professional, right? He's also an extremely troubled guy in the sense that like, you know how like sometimes you meet someone and they like within 10 minutes you know everything about them.
Yeah.
Right? You're just like, wow, okay, that was too much information, right? Yeah. Then sometimes you've known people for years and you're just like, oh yeah, that's Steve. And they're like, where does Steve work? I don't really know. He's never told me. Or like, is Steve in a relationship? Again, he's never really told me, right?
Yeah.
So Henry is like some people are closed books. Henry's like, imagine.
I don't think his name is Henry, as a side note.
Oh shit, is it Harry?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's Harry Call.
Okay.
Have you been saying Henry this whole time?
Have I? All right.
I just caught on to that.
Oh shit.
Oh man, this
Well,
is embarrassing.
this is
for
embarrassing
you.
for me and only me. So I was about to do a really good analogy too.
Sorry.
I'm just gonna jump right back into it.
Yeah.
So Gene Hackman's character Harry Call is like, again, you know how some people are open books, some people are closed books. Harry is like a closed book that's also like behind like a layer of concrete and a barbed wire fence.
Yeah.
This guy essentially has no friends and basically not really any romantic relationships either because he is so paranoid and so unwilling to let people get close to him.
Right.
Right? So there's a really interesting scene early on in the movie where he comes home to find that his landlord has left him a bottle of wine for his birthday.
Yep.
Also, can we just take a moment to appreciate that I guess in the 70s, landlords would give you gifts? Have you ever gotten a gift from your landlord?
Other than like maybe moving in, no.
Yeah, right? Okay, my old landlord helped me install a set of drapes once. I guess that's it.
Nice.
But so instead of being tickled by this, he immediately phones her up and demands the spare key to his apartment because he wants the only key. And then he's like, how did you even know it was my birthday? And he finds out that she's been glancing through his mail. So he, again, is very upset about this, right? There's a very compelling scene early on in the movie when he goes to visit his, I'm going to say girlfriend in like massive air quotes. And like she keeps kind of needling him for more information that he refuses to give her, right? So again, Harry is an extremely troubled man. Anyways, when the movie starts, he's been contracted to spy on these two young people who are just out for a stroll in the business district, chatting about nothing. And he is able to crack this code and get the audio despite all the interferences. But he comes to suspect that maybe his client has nefarious designs for this young people.
Yeah.
And then it kind of just goes from there. It's a very, very slow burn thriller.
Very, 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 very slow burn thriller. Although I will say that there are moments in this movie that made me sit up straight. And that happened 2-3 times in this movie.
There are indeed, and they're probably the same 2 or 3 moments. I
Yeah.
probably have the same reaction.
Yeah, and I think at its crux, there's 2 main ideas in this movie, and you kind of summarize them up very well. There's the idea of this conversation that's kind of running throughout this movie, and what does this conversation mean? What are
Right,
the
and
implications?
I should say that like that's the opening scene is
Yes.
him tapping this conversation.
Literally, the opening scene is like people walking around, and there's a bunch of people who are semi paying attention to what they're doing, and we're kind of hearing in and out this conversation that's happening.
Right, and like also it's a very inane sounding conversation. It's the kind of conversation couples have when they've been together for a long time. right? So, but again, it's kind of, there's also something kind of like mysterious about it. Like, there's a couple moments where you're just like, are they like speaking in code to each other?
Yeah.
Like, what is this?
It really drops you like it really drops you into this world without you knowing anything at all, which is really interesting. I don't think movies do that very often anymore.
Right. So, like, you know how when you take a bath, you usually, like, you know, you do some hot water, then you do some cold water, and then you just kind of gently ease yourself into it. This movie is like being chucked into, like, a hot cauldron, and you just have to roll with it.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And then the other component of this, like you said, is it's a character study. It's about Harry Call and who this character is and how he just moves about this world and interacts
How,
with
like,
this
his
world.
various neuroses seem to dictate his life.
Yeah.
Or, like, what even really passes for a life, you know?
Yeah, for sure. So, characters and people you may know, there's some really interesting people who pop up throughout this movie.
Yeah, there's one person who shows up pre-fame
Fame.
that you're just like, oh, it's that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Gene Hackman obviously is the star of the show, Harry Call. I gotta say, like, Gene Hackman is, I think, wildly underrated by our generation and younger.
Yeah, he's... You know, we actually just watched The Royal Tenenbaums recently.
In the last year. Yep.
Yeah, where he plays a very, like, kind of eccentric, oddball, fast-talking con man.
Yep.
And then here he is playing, like, a very kind of withdrawn, combative, like, shy, timid sort of character.
Yeah. And it's super drastically opposite to his own personality, but also a lot of the other character he plays in a lot of other films. I haven't seen more than, like, 3 to 5 Gene Hackman movies in my entire life, and every one of them has been really good, and he's always kind of one of the highlights of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, he was Lex Luthor in the 4 Superman movies,
Yep.
right?
He's the villain in Unforgiven.
Oh, yeah, he was the sheriff in that movie.
Yep.
Yeah, he often plays villains.
Yep.
And I mean, just look at him, right? It's funny. I don't mean to throw shade at Gene Hackman, but there's a moment in this movie when someone's like, "How old are you, Harry?" And he's like, 44. And I was like, "The fuck you are." But I guess everyone just kind of looked like that back then.
Yeah, for sure. So I think he's the main draw for this one, and he's obviously the character that this is so completely, like, enraptured with, this movie.
I don't even think there's a single scene that he's not present for.
Nope.
I think there might be. No, actually, I
don't think there's
that's
one.
it. Yeah.
I think this is completely from his perspective. And then the other character, I feel like John Cazale is actually in this movie less than I was expecting, to be honest.
He's kind of barely in the movie.
Yeah.
He plays Stan, like Harry's assistant.
Oh my God, man.
Yeah.
I don't know why you got stuck on this Henry train.
I get the H's, yeah. I'm not good with names.
So John Cazale is going to be somebody that we talk about because he's also one of the most central characters to The Godfather Part 2.
Yeah, he's Fredo, like the shithead.
Fredo, yeah.
Fredo, yeah, the shithead.
And he's such an interesting figure in cinema because he unfortunately passed away in his 40s due to cancer, and he actually only starred in 5 movies. And at this point on the podcast, we will have covered, by the time we do Godfather Part 2, 4 of the 5.
Wow.
Yeah, because it just so happens that every movie that he was in turned out to be an amazing movie that was either nominated for or won Best Picture.
Maybe that's the way to do it. Like, I hate to say it, but like maybe just star in masterpieces and then die. Like,
I wasn't sure if you were going to go there or not, and then you did.
yeah, well, here we are.
So he's fantastic. Like, he's great in everything. I almost didn't recognize him in this movie. Like, I did because I knew he was going to show up at some point in this movie.
I feel like you're right. He's very underutilized in this movie.
Yeah,
right?
I think he is.
So basically, he plays Harry's kind of like beleaguered assistant.
Yeah.
Right? Who is like frustrated and annoyed with his boss, and like, you know, even he is annoyed by how private and secretive Harry is.
Right.
But then, you know, things kind of dovetail from there.
And then apart from that, the other characters, so there's like the couple that are having the discussion, the whole conversation that the movie is based around. So that's Terry Garr, who I don't really know all that well, and I don't think modern audiences are going to know. And then there's Frederick Forrest, who just the entire time we were watching this was like, who is that? She was like, he looks so recognizable. And the reason why he was recognizable to us is because we watched Apocalypse Now like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
And he's Chef in Apocalypse Now. He's one of the main group of guys in the film.
He was on the boat. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Huh.
so that's where we both recognized him from. There's also some really cool, like you said, really cool early appearances, specifically from one Harrison Ford.
Yeah.
And maybe his first role in Hollywood. I actually didn't check that.
So this was a pre-Star Wars Harrison Ford.
Yeah, he's super young in this movie.
Yeah, like he's like I actually pulled out my phone and Googled it. I'm like, okay, this was 3 years before Star Wars, and he's playing a very not Han Solo-y character.
This is, so on his IMDb here, he does have a few movies before this, and they're all like really, really small. And then he had a supporting role in American Graffiti the year before this, which is George Lucas's, I think, first feature film. And then this being the other movie to finally start to put him on the map and like get him more opportunities. And then after that is Han Solo.
Yeah, and like Harrison Ford is almost kind of like, so he's the assistant to the director, Harry's client, but like we don't really see the director until like almost the very like the bitter end of the movie.
Yeah, and I actually don't want to spoil who the director is. And I think for a lot of people, it might not be as exciting, but I think if you're a big movie nerd, it's kind of cool when the director shows up.
And you're like, oh, hey, it's him. Yeah.
Exactly.
And that particular actor has a annoying habit of just randomly showing up in movies.
He does.
You're like, oh, it's that guy.
Yeah. I mean, he's great. He's one of the greatest actors of all time.
Yeah, for sure.
But there's also one other actor, and I'm not even sure that you noticed him because I didn't notice him. And then in doing research, I was like, wait, pardon? It is Billy D. Williams, who you may know as Lando Calrissian from Star Wars.
Where was he in this movie?
He is the man in the yellow hat in the opening scene. He's actually in like this conversation scene walking around. If you pay attention, you can see the man in the yellow hat, which is Lando
Calrissian. So this is a real there's a real Star Wars prequel vibe kind of going on, right? Yeah.
So kind of cool that both Han and Lando show up in this movie.
Interesting. Well, oh, the 70s.
And then rounding things off as a director of the film, Francis Ford Coppola, obviously, who we've done 2 of his movies now. We've done The Godfather Part 1, we've done Bram Stoker's Dracula, and this will be number 3, The Conversation. I guess really the last 2 like massive ones that we'll have to do at some point is Apocalypse Now, which is one of my all-time favorite movies.
Yeah.
And The Outsiders.
Also that.
And The Godfather Part 2 coming soon.
Coming soon. And maybe The Godfather Part 3 at some point.
Yeah, we'll see. I don't know if you can convince me to watch that one. I've heard that it's fine, but it's just like not anywhere near the same standard as the first 2.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm really conflicted about that one, but anyway. Yeah, this is, again, one of Francis Ford Coppola's masterpiece films. Like, he considers this his best movie that he made.
Yeah, no, it's really, this movie, where should we go from here?
So, I mean, we have to talk who this movie is for, right? And does it hold up to a modern watch?
Okay, maybe I should get into like how, like so again, I went into this movie, like, to go with my earlier analogy, it's like I was chucked into like a vat of boiling water and I just had to adjust, right?
Right.
So I will say, for me personally, there was kind of like a learning curve to this movie where, again, you get kicked right into it. And normally, sometimes that can work, but like we open with like,
I kind of see exactly where you're going.
Well, it's like we open with like this young couple having this very bizarre conversation, and we can see like, dudes in windows like photographing them, and then we can see like Gene Hackman and Stan in their like little, secret like van where they're like monitoring the conversation, and like, again, for me going into this movie blind, for the first 10 minutes I was like, what the fuck am I looking at? Like, what is going on? Right?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't even expecting that, to be honest, and I kind of had like a basic gist of what this movie was about.
Yeah. So like, to be honest, it's kind of funny. Like, I watched maybe the first so I watched this movie a few days ago. We're recording on a Tuesday. I think I saw this on Saturday or Friday,
Mm-hmm.
and I watched the first 20 minutes, and I just kind of went, you know what? I actually have some errands to run, and I just closed my laptop and like ran out of the house.
Jesus.
Yeah. But then I came back to it, and I was like, okay, all right,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But like, I will say, and this is kind of spoiling maybe my final opinion, but like, this movie is a real slow burner.
Yeah.
You know, and like you,
It's a character study, basically.
yeah, and like you really have to go into it with that mindset, and like you really kind of have to be patient with it.
I think you've nailed it, and I think that means that this movie is not going to be for everyone.
I think, and I'm just kind of articulating this now, this movie is not immediately compelling.
No.
You have to really just kind of be patient and wait.
Well, and you know, it's like a neo-noir film, which I think that genre for me often kind of feels like that, where it's like I kind of have to be ready to just jump into the whole journey rather than be immediately sucked into whatever's happening.
Yeah, well, it's funny, like, you know, I feel like just for me as a creative person, like, there's so much anxiety of like, is this boring? Is this boring? Is this scene going on too long? Like, does something exciting need to happen? But then you've got this movie where it's just like
Plodding along.
well, yeah, where it's just like, fuck you. You're going to spend 10 minutes just watching them recording this conversation about nothing, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it's also considered a mystery and a thriller. Like the thriller is very low key thrilling. But
I will say this is one of those movies where like the second hour really ramps up.
yes,
Once it gets going, it does kind of really get going.
and I think there's like one particular moment that happens in the film,
Mhm.
maybe at the end of the first act, where, like I said, I literally sat up in my seat and I was like, "Oh, this is gonna go somewhere." Like I can finally start to see what's happening with this movie and what it's doing. The other thought that I had about this movie is that I've kind of coined it as an essay movie. This is a movie that you could write an essay about. You would be very satisfied with the essay that you write about this movie, but you might not be as satisfied writing or watching the movie as you did thinking and writing the essay.
You know, we normally save this to the end of our deep dive, but I'm just going to say right now, this is one of those movies where like I certainly admire it on an
Right.
intellectual level, but it wasn't the most thrilling
Right.
experience I've ever had. I will say though, the sequences that kind of abandon the plot and like really zero in on Gene Hackman's character,
Yep.
Harry, when like the camera really zooms into him and we see him in these more private, intimate moments, then I'm sitting up a little straighter. Like, wow, like okay, like within the first 20 minutes, I mentioned he goes over to his quote unquote girlfriend's house and like, you know, he brings her the wine and like, you know, she's like, oh, I was waiting for you and blah, 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 blah. And like, it seems like a very romantic kind of intimate moment. But then it's interesting how like, again, this woman, I think her name's Amy, she keeps kind of trying to ply him for information and he just kind of keeps evading her, you
Right.
know?
Yep.
Right. And then it's actually kind of heartbreaking. Like as he goes to leave, Amy just kind of very sweetly, she's a very sweet lady. You can tell just by looking at her. She's like, basically she says something to the effect of like, you know, when I heard your key in the lock, I was so excited. I started wiggling my toes and like, I've been waiting for you all day, but like, I don't think I'm going to wait for you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oof.
Yeah.
Hey, hey, Harry, you know, if you want to keep a woman around, you kind of have to tell her things. You have to reveal just a little bit.
I think the other things that this movie does really well that I think maybe would find its audience is like, if you're into security and like IT and technology and like, you know, even just like kind of have a semi interest in how that technology has developed over the years and like espionage and stuff like that, like this movie is really hyper focused on the people who do that for a living.
The minutia of it all.
And it's kind of wild because a lot of the technology that's used in this movie was well researched and like actually available at the time. And likewise, for historians out there, like this movie came out as the Watergate scandal was happening, and a lot of the technology that they used in this movie for capturing the audio of people was actually the technology that was used during the Watergate scandal.
Yeah, and like, you know, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this movie is a commentary on Watergate, but shockingly, like, Coppola wrote this before Watergate. It just so happened to come
like
out
a
at
decade before too.
Yeah, and it just so happened to come out at the same time, right?
Yeah, which could help boost it a little bit as well at
Yeah.
the time. But I think that's where the audiences are going to be interested in it. Like, I actually recommended this to one of the IT guys that I work with because I was like, like, you're really interested in security and stuff like that. Like, I think that this movie is really interesting.
I don't,
in that sense.
all the podcasts we've done together, I don't think we've ever watched a movie and be like, you know who this movie's for? Nerds. Tech bros.
But even on that sense, though, like I guess I'll spoil my opinion a little bit. Like, even though this movie is paced really slow, I really enjoyed this movie a lot. And that's the other, I guess, aspect of this movie that I think people are going to enjoy is people who are audiophiles, like people who love a well-mixed movie and like good audio. Like, this is maybe the best mixed movie I've ever heard in my entire life.
Yeah. I mean, you, a part-time podcast editor, you must have really enjoyed this.
Yeah, I was genuinely like floored by the audio quality of this movie. And I was watching it at home. All I have is a sound bar. Like, I do not have a good surround sound setup yet. But someday this is going to be one of those like movies that I come to watch in like whenever I have like a full surround sound. It's going to be like top of my list to check out.
Okay, interesting. Well, I will come over when that happens.
Yeah.
Assuming we're still on speaking terms then.
And then the last thought that I had about this too is, there's a movie that I watched in the last couple years that as this movie kind of played out, I was like, this is really reminding me of like a specific film. And that's The Killer from 2023.
Okay.
It's David Fincher's most recent movie.
Okay.
It stars Michael Fassbender. I believe it's on Netflix. And it's about a hitman for hire who basically we just follow him on a job. And
I think you've told me about this movie.
Yeah, and I liked that movie. I didn't love it. It's definitely not like in my top 5 Fincher films, but it follows a very similar trajectory. Whereas we see this character and how they move through their world and their job, and it also there's kind of this mere reflection of like maybe this character isn't actually as good as at their job as everybody thinks they are.
Okay.
And maybe they're not actually as good as what they do as they think they are. And so I think that's the other key element of this movie is, and we'll talk about in the deep dive, like Harry Caul might not actually be all that great at what he does.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. There's like a good 15-minute stretch of this movie that I really enjoyed. It's when he goes to the like the convention with the other, surveillance experts, and like it's interesting how people find out he's Harry Caul. They're like, "Oh my God, you're Harry Caul!"
Yeah.
Like, and we'll talk more about that in the deep dive, presumably. But like, there is something. Maybe we should save this for the deep dive. But let me just ask you, like, do you like Harry Caul?
I don't know if I would. I don't know. I think we got to save that one for the deep dive.
I feel we'll get more into it next week.
Because I don't know. I think I got to dive into that question more.
Okay.
So let's do that one next week.
I'll just say, and we'll get into it more next week, but like, I feel a tremendous sense of like pity for this man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pity.
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess to wrap this up with, does this movie hold up to a modern day watch? I think for general audiences, no.
Yeah, no. I think it's too just slow paced for most viewers.
Yeah. And despite that, I thought this movie was amazing. So I think that this movie definitely has a viewership in 2025, but I think most people are not going to be interested in a movie like this.
No, I mean, even when you talk about like Francis Ford Coppola and like his masterpieces, this movie is usually not mentioned.
It's mentioned in maybe the top like 5 or 6. Like, I would say this is probably his 3rd or 4th best movie, honestly.
Okay.
But it's definitely like, it gets overshadowed by the Godfather films, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and then the one scene to sell movie, there actually isn't a scene online available to select for this, but I actually think that's not a bad thing because I don't want to spoil any of the twists and turns that happen in this movie because like when those twists and turns happen, they're so big, they feel so big.
They're so sharp that
that to spoil it with like a 2-minute clip to decide if you want to watch this movie, I don't think does that justice. And then The other clips of this movie with Harry Call just kind of going about his life are probably just not intriguing enough without context.
Yeah, you're just like, why is this old man so...
Yeah.
Why can't this old man open up to anyone?
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't think there is a proper scene that you could even sell somebody on with this movie. I think you just
No.
either based on like what we said, like you're interested or you're not interested in this one. And that's kind of up to you. But I honestly think that this is worth your time if you're okay with the slow burn.
Yeah.
So
Much like the hot sauce you gave me with our dinner tonight, you have to be okay with the slow burn.
Nice. So when to watch? This is, for me, a Sunday afternoon movie. This is like a, lay on the couch and just kind of let a slow movie burn over you.
Just let it like wash over you.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like this is more of an evening movie, to be honest.
Yeah?
It's a neo-noir, right?
Yeah, that's true.
That said, for a neo-noir, this movie mostly takes place during the day.
Yeah, it's a little mixed. I was just thinking about that. I was going to say, like, I think this movie takes place, like, a good chunk of it takes place at night. There's some very key scenes that take place at night.
Yes.
So, and then where to watch? Right now it's streaming on the Criterion Network, so you can check it out there. I just rented it on YouTube.
Oh, high five. My
And
man.
it was great. Yeah, it was great. I really enjoyed it on that. And I think that's it for the primer episode.
I guess so.
Yeah, so we'll catch you on the deep dive. I hope that if this movie sounds remotely interesting to you, that you go and check it out, because again, I think it's kind of one of those hidden gems that we've kind of lost. But again, if you're not into the slow burn, this probably isn't for you.
I'm definitely not as high on this movie as you are, but I am glad I saw it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is definitely one of those, like, you should probably check this movie out at some point in your life. Just be prepared.
Yeah. Be prepared. Yeah, Harrison Ford does not at any point like turn into the Red Hulk and start throwing cars. Like you gotta be okay with that.
Did you go and see that movie? Did you go and see the new Captain
No,
America?
and I don't think anybody did.
So, spoilers, Red Hulk doesn't show up until an hour 50 into the movie.
Oh,
Yeah.
fuck off. He's like all over the posters.
Yeah, so I think you should temper your expectations.
Yeah. Okay. You know what? Go watch this instead of the new Captain America movie, because you know what? This is probably more worth your time.
Okay, and I guess that's it. So we've got Deep Dive coming up next week, and then Godfather Part 2 to wrap up our Oscar series.
Pew, pew, pew. It's going to be an exciting month.
Yeah.
And who says February is the most depressing month of the year?
How many of the Oscar nominations have you watched yet this year?
None of them.
Really?
Really?
Oh my god,
Give me-
you haven't even seen Doom Part 2, yeah.
No, I have seen Dune Part 2.
Oh, you did?
I
You
did
finally
actually.
checked it out?
I watched it with my friend Andrew, and we both really liked it.
Mm.
I was not crazy about Part 1.
Yeah.
Even when we saw it 4 years ago. I remember going to see it with you and our friend Mike, and we left the theater, and you guys were both all over it, and I was kind of just
I think we each had a different thing that we had a nitpick about.
yeah.
But you were definitely the most down on it.
I was just kind of like, it's just too slow for me, guys. Sorry.
Yeah. I've only watched half of the movies that are Best Pictures this year. So Anora, Conclave, Doom Part 2, and The Substance I've all watched. Of those, I think it's going to be Anora that wins Best Picture by what I've heard, but
I don't even know what Anora's about.
yeah, I really liked it. I didn't love it,
Is that
but
the
I
one
really
about
liked
the
it.
sex worker?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. You told me to watch it.
Yeah, no, I think it's worth your time. I think it's worth most people's time, but I don't think that a lot of people are going to be like, this is the best movie ever made.
Okay.
Whereas The Substance, I absolutely loved. I just don't see it possibly winning a Best Picture for what it is.
I don't know. It might.
The fact that it got the nod even for Best Picture is pretty cool, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very. Again, that's another movie that like I didn't like as much as you did, but I will concede it's spectacularly well made.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, anyway, I guess that's it for the primer episode. So we will see you next time for the deep dive. of the
Bye-bye.
conversation. And we're gonna have a conversation about the conversation.
Oh, I see what you did there. Check your phone lines.
Yeah. Okay. See you next time.
Bye.